Good evening, dear students. Welcome to today's session. And I hope that the last two sessions on this chapter number 4, you have gone through each and every concept which we have done in our session. And as I've requested you that you need to go through the entire module, including the illustrations and example, I expect that the same has been done. Okay? So I can see a number of you have already joined. Good evening, Karthik, Aitha, Aradhana, Sushil, Radhika, Menon, Ayush, Sudhanshu. So I can see there is a query. Khushi, your query I'll take up at the end of the session. I've gone through it, but this is related to test of controls, which we'll be discussing at the end of the session. Okay? Keep on sending your queries so that I can know whether the concepts are clear to you or not. And students, believe me, these concepts are going to be crystal clear to you once you go through the module. So again, I'll request you that whatever we cover, you need to go through the module in entirety, including the illustrations, the flowcharts, the examples, because all these beautifully explains the concept. Okay? And apart from this, I have uploaded the MCQs, the correct, incorrect questions and the descriptive questions along with their answers. Okay? So you all are requested to please download them and try to solve the questions. We will also solve those questions at the end of the session as the time will permit. Okay? So Karthik is saying that he has already read the study material. Like the last two sessions, he has gone through the module. That's good, Karthik. And I expect the same for the rest of all the students, right? So now, Khushi, I've told you, I'll take up your query at the end of the session. So let us start with the session today. And before starting with the topic for today, which is what component of internal control, let us quickly recapitulate as to what we have done so far in this chapter. So we started our chapter with discussion of audit risk. We understood what is meant by risk of material misstatement, inherent risk, control risk, and detection risk, right? Then we did essay 315. The name of the essay is what? Identifying and assessing the risk of material misstatement through understanding the entity and its environment. Why I'm repeating this name? Because if you learn this name now, the most of the concept of essay 315 will be clear to you. Okay? So focus on learning after understanding. Okay? Then we saw that what all understanding, the knowledge of the client business is required for an auditor. Then we obtained an understanding about what? The internal control. The internal controls that are relevant to audit, and understanding of the relevant controls. Then we discussed the components of internal control, whereby we were discussing that there are 5 components of internal control. First is what? Control environment. Let me just share the module. So, control environment, entities risk assessment process, information system. These 3 we have already discussed. Control activities and monitoring of control will be discussing today. Okay? So students, have told you like a flower needs an environment to grow. Same way, internal control needs an environment, needs some components by which it can work effectively. It can operate effectively. So these are the 5 components. Okay? I hope the first 3 components, control environment, entities risk assessment process, and information system, all 3 are clear to you. I'll just wait for 5 or 10 seconds, then I'll start the balance 2 components. So Sonika is saying she is able to learn the concepts also. So that is good, Sonika. So Karthik, let me just have a look at your query. So I've given you, in fact, Karthik has reminded me of the homework that I've given you, that you were supposed to read the communications that are required given on page number 4.24. So I hope you all have gone through these requirements, and if not, then please go through these requirements in the break when we'll be taking, and Karthik, your query I'll be resolving after the break. So now starting with the fourth component, which is what? Control activity, one of the component of internal control. So let us try to understand this component with the help of an example. So let us say that with respect to sales, the company, the client, the management, they have implemented certain internal control. So first of all, let's say the company has a system whereby the sales order will come, which will be approved. Then entry will be passed in the system, followed by, let's say, dispatch of goods, whereby at the factory gate, certain entries in the registers will be made. Okay? Now, what is this? Internal control implemented by whom? By the client, by the management of the client entity. Now, see, what is this? We are saying that let us suppose that all these things are done by different personas. So what is that? I can say segregation of duties, right? Segregation of duty. Okay? I've written that sales order need to be approved. What is this? It requires certain authorization. Correct? Then certain entries in the system are to be passed related to sales, general entries. So I can say information processing. Then when at the factory gate, the dispatch has been made, the goods are properly counted, the products are counted, the entries are made, there are CCTV cameras which monitor each and everything. So can I say there are physical control? There are what? Physical control. Okay? And let's say after the sales are made, the budgeted sales are compared with the actual sales by the concerned persona. So can I say this is performance review? Now try to understand the concept of control activities. I hope this simple example is clear. So management has given certain directives. These are what? Management directives. That if sales are made now, this system needs to be followed. Which system? This system needs to be followed. Okay? Now, in order to be sure that management directives are carried out, there are certain policies and procedures. Such policies and procedures which are there to ensure that management directives are carried out are called control activities. Are called what? Control activities. So in our example, see, let us just have a look at the definition. Then I'm sure that if you keep this example in your mind, you will be able to grasp this definition very easily. So policies and procedures that help ensure that management directives are carried out. So the two keywords are management directives, policies and procedures. So now let us go to our example. So these were the management directives. Let me just highlight them. These were what? These were the management directives, that if any sale is to be made, it needs to follow all this process. The entire process should be like that. That first sales order is there, then the same should be approved, relevant entries should be passed. When the goods are getting dispatched, some entries in their stock register, some entries in all the factory gate register, everything is to be made, right? So in order to be sure, in order to make sure that the directives, management directives, which I have marked as blue color, these are carried out. Management made certain policies and procedures. These are what? These are the control activities. Okay? So let us have a look at it from our module. So, the auditor shall obtain an understanding of the control activities. Now, what are control activities? Control activities are the policies and procedure that help ensure that management directives are carried out. For example, authorization. Hana? We saw that sales order need to be approved, performance review, comparison of budget with the actual, information processing by way of what? General entries, physical control, when register entries in the factory register or the monitoring by the CCTV cameras are there, segregation of duty. The entire example that we took, it has been performed by different personnel. Okay? So now, see, these policies and procedures are important so as to ensure that whatever management has given the direction with respect to internal control, these are followed. Now, when we are understanding the concept of internal control, the components of internal control, so this control activities, these become a very important component of internal control. Unless and until these control activities are followed properly by the personnel, by the organization, the internal control cannot work effectively. So we as auditors, when we are trying to understand the internal control, we need to obtain an understanding about the control activities also. Okay. Now another thing, see, control activities are also implemented with respect to certain significant risk. With respect to certain significant risk. Now, a question might come to your mind that what are significant risks? And my dear students, what are significant risks? This is a very, very important question. Okay? So, before starting with the topic of significant risk, please send in your replies as to whether you have understood the example that we discussed and whether the concept of control activities is clear or not. Is it clear? Abhi, I'm not saying that entire control activities. Abhi, 2 portions are left in control activities, but I want you to reply whether the example is clear. The definition, I hope you are now able to learn this definition after understanding. Why? Because now you know that certain directives are there. So those directives need to be carried out. For that, management has issued certain what? Policies and procedures. And those policies and procedures are called what? Control activities. So Hitesh is saying, yes, ma'am, it is clear. Rest also please reply. So very good. Dhanalakshmi is saying, ma'am, example and concept is clear. Good. Okay. Now, for my another question to you is, tell me, the organization, the management must have implemented a number of control activities with respect to each and every aspect in the organization, be it related to the security, be it related to the HR department. A number of control activities must have been there. So, are we required to obtain an understanding of all the control activities? A quick answer, yes or no. Are we required to obtain an understanding of all the control activities? So, the answer is that an auditor needs to obtain the understanding of the control activities that are relevant for his risk assessment process. He needs to obtain an understanding of the control activities with respect to significant classes of transactions, account balances, disclosure in the financial statement, and assertion which the auditor finds relevant in his risk assessment process. Hana? See, when we understood the internal control, if you remember, we did a topic, controls relevant to audit. Same way, control activities that are relevant to the auditor's understanding of risk assessment process. Hana, which are related to significant classes of transactions, account balance, and disclosure in the financial statement, the auditor needs to obtain an understanding about that. Okay? Clear? Okay. Now we were discussing significant risk. Now, what is meant by significant risk? Anyone? If you can just send in your replies, what do you understand by significant risk? Try to understand the concept by breaking it. So there are two keywords, significant and risk. Risk we have already done in our first chapter. Risk is something negative, Hana? Something unpleasant. And what is significant? Important. Hana? So significant risk, what is significant risk? So significant risks are inherent risks with both a higher likelihood of occurrence and higher magnitude of potential misstatements. So what is significant risk? This concept is explained in SA 315. So it says that a risk is significant. It becomes important. See, all risks are significant. Hana? Auditor needs to concentrate on all the risks that he finds while he's assessing the risk of material misstatement. But certain kind of risks, certain factors have been given in SA 315 that auditor, when you are assessing whether a risk is significant or not, whether a risk is significant. Students, you all have done the concept of materiality, SA 320, materiality in planning and performing an audit. So we as an auditor, we are concerned with what? Material things. So when the auditor needs to consider whether a risk is significant or not, there are certain factors which we'll be discussing just now. So as of now, what is the definition? It says that it is one of the inherent risk. What is inherent risk? Risk which is inbuilt in the financial statement. This concept is clear. So significant risks are inherent risk with both higher likelihood of occurrence, that is their chances of occurrence is high, right? And higher magnitude of potential misstatement, and their impact is also going to be high. So risk, which are what? Inherent risk. They are inbuilt in the financial statements. So out of the inherent risk, certain risk will be there which have high chances of occurrence and which have higher magnitude. What is the magnitude? It is the size or the importance due to the nature of potential misstatement. What is potential? Likely misstatement. So such kind of risk are what? Significant risk. And Hitesh has given correct answer. He's written that risk related to fraud, which is absolutely correct. So risk related to fraud, it is significant. Let's say a company is there which has cash payments. It pays wages to the workers on daily wages in cash. So the chances of misstatement is high. Also, the magnitude is going to be high if someone intends to misappropriate such cash. So the risk of material misstatement due to fraud, example of significant risk. Then the significant transactions with related parties that are outside the normal course of business for the entity. So as such, any transaction with the related party, you cannot say that it is risky. It will always be risky. No. Transactions with related party can be riskier. Why? Because see, both the parties know each other. So the chances of manipulation increases, right? You must have read in SA 550, related parties. So you must have understood the concept that as such, there is no bar on the transactions with related party. But see what is written, that are outside the normal course of business for the entity. Let's try to understand. Our entity, it is in the business of, let's say, manufacturing cycles. But during the year, the company has entered into a property sale transaction with the wife of the MD of the company. Now, related party, and transaction outside the normal course of business for the entity. So yes, it is what? Significant. Okay? So examples are what? Fraud, the related party transaction. So this is clear that these are what? A type of inherent risk whereby the likelihood of occurrence is high and also higher magnitude. What is magnitude? Importance due to size or nature of potential misstatement. Okay? So I told you that there are certain factors which have been given, which the auditor, when he's exercising his professional judgment as to whether a risk is significant or not, he will consider these. What are these? He will consider a risk to be significant when the risk is a risk of fraud. Obviously, we have discussed this. Okay? Then when it is related to transactions with related party, which this also we have done. Okay? Now, if the risk is related to recent significant economic, accounting and other developments like changes in regulatory environment and therefore requires specific attention. From VAT, there was a transition to GST. So there were what? Significant changes. Ind AS were introduced. So the accounting change. So significant economic, accounting and other developments. Okay? So these become what? Significant risk. Complexity of transaction. Let's say taxation, tax calculations. These calculations might be complex. So significant risk. Where the degree of subjectivity in the measurement of financial information related to the risk, especially those measurements involving wide range of measurement uncertainty, calculation of estimates, let's say provision for doubtful debts, it can be 10%, 11%, 12%. So there is what? Measurement uncertainty. So it becomes what? Significant. Okay? And where there are unusual transactions, those risk with respect to unusual transaction, they also become what? Significant risk. I gave you example of what? Property sale. Okay? So see, here judgmental matters means whereby the judgment is involved. See, how much provision is to be made, it depends upon management's judgment. There is no set rule that this industry or this company working in this industry will make 5% provision for doubtful debts. No, it depends upon management judgment and the circumstances of the company. Okay? So judgmental matters. You have throughout the subject of this audit, the sessions that you have attended, throughout the sessions we discussed that all these risk assessment of risk of material misstatement, everything, everywhere in the audit, auditor applies his what? Professional judgment. So understood? Judgment. Magnitude, yes, Hitesh, it means intensity. Okay? So I hope your doubts are clear. Okay? Now let us try to understand two examples of significant risk in detail. So it says that where there are non-routine transactions or judgmental matters is what? Where judgment is involved. So these are what? Significant risks. So risk associated with these matters become significant risk. Now let us try to understand why. See, non-routine transaction. For example, there has been some mergers and acquisitions during the year. Now, why the risk associated with these transactions are significant risk? Because there is greater management intervention in accounting treatment. Management will come now. So greater management intervention. And if management has an intention to commit some fraud, that can happen. So the risk increases. Greater manual intervention of data collection and processing. Why? Because this is unusual. Routine transaction to nahi hai for which there must be some system in place. So manual intervention. So where manual intervention is there, collusion among parties can happen. Collusion among employees can happen. Complex calculations or accounting principles. And the nature of non-routine transaction, which may make it difficult for the entity to implement effective controls over the risk. So that is why such areas become what? Significant risk. The risk associated with unusual non-routine transaction becomes what? Significant risk. Okay? Same way, judgmental matters. Significant judgmental matters. I gave example of what? Calculation of estimates. So since they have different interpretations, it might happen that one company, there are two companies working in the same scenario, same situation, everything same. Hana? One company has made a provision for bad and doubtful debts at 10%. The other company has made it at 8% or 5%. So it is what? These are such matters that they have different interpretations by different persons. Hana? So let's say if a company has made a provision for 10% and management feels no, it should have been made at, the auditor feels that it should have been made at 7%. But since these are the matters of different interpretation, management will say this is my judgment. Based on the situation, I have made it at 10%. So there is no precise calculation, no precise measurement as such. Okay? And another example is about fair value. So with respect to calculation of fair value, with respect to the future events, a lot of judgment is involved. Okay? Now, why are we studying this topic in internal control? Karthik is asking, right? And now, why in control activities? See, internal control, the company, the management, it will be implementing on the risky areas. If you remember, the second component of internal control is what? Entities risk assessment process. So like we as auditor, we assess the risk of material misstatement. Hana? Entity, the client also assesses its risk, inherent risk, and then it implements the internal control. Hana? Now see, these are the areas whereby implementing an effective internal control is not easy. See, the nature of non-routine transactions which may make it difficult for the entity to implement effective controls over such risk. So here, auditor needs to be alert that this is the area where effective control has not been implemented. So when the auditor is analyzing, he is obtaining an understanding of the control activities, he will consider all these risks, all these significant risks. And what will auditor do? See, if the effective control, internal control has not been implemented, will auditor mention this in the audit report? Nahi. What will auditor do? He will first of all extend his work. He will extend his audit procedure. That effective internal control nahi hai, so I'll extend my audit procedures. I'll do a detailed checking. I'll check this transaction from the very beginning till the end. Accordingly, auditor will plan his what? Audit procedures. Okay? So Karthik, are you able to understand? Why are we understanding internal control? Because we, as an auditor, we need to plan. We need to plan the substantive procedures. Hana? So that is why we need to understand how effective the controls are. And with respect to significant risk areas, auditor needs to be alert, very alert. And when he is exercising his judgment as to which risks are significant risk, the auditor shall consider at least the following, which are these factors. See, it is mentioned here. As part of risk assessment, the auditor shall determine whether any risk identified are in the auditor's judgment significant risk. ऐसे तो नहीं है that certain risk are what? Significant risk. तो क्या करना है? Ignore करना है उन risk को? नहीं, auditor will extend his audit procedure with respect to significant risk. In case of significant risk areas, auditor may decide that, okay, I'll not rely on the internal control with respect to these areas. I'll extend my substantive procedure with respect to these areas. Okay? Yes, measurement uncertainty is a significant risk, Dhanalakshmi. Why? Because when there is measurement uncertainty, the management may use this as a chance to, to commit fraud. Management may use such situation to commit fraud. Management wants to increase the profits. Management will make a low provision for doubtful and provision for bad and doubtful debts. Management want to reduce, it may make a high percentage of provision for bad and doubtful debts. So where there is measurement uncertainty, such are the areas where frauds can occur. Okay, Dhanlakshmi, is it clear? Good. So Amritpal is asking, ma'am, nature and extent of understanding of relevant control. So when we were understanding this topic, let me just take you through the topic. This nature and extent of understanding relevant control. So here we understood that with respect to relevant control, if you remember, I gave you example कि नट बोल्ट लेके खोल के देखना है क्या बायोमेट्रिक डिवाइस की क्या क्या है उसके अंदर, नहीं. We as auditor, we need to understand what the design and implementation of the relevant control. So what kind of understanding an auditor needs here? ठीक है? Whose doubt was it? Amritpal Kaur. Is it clear? So the design, the implementation we need to understand here. ठीक है? And this is the topic which is what? Control activity, one of the components of internal control. ठीक है? What are control activities? That in order to be sure that the management directives are followed, certain policies and procedures are issued by the management. Those are called control activities. ठीक है? We as auditors, we need to consider all these. Examples are what? Authorization, performance review, information processing, physical control, segregation of duty. Just remember that sales wala example. Now, why there is a topic of significant risk here? Because control activities also include the activities related to what? Significant risk. Now, what are significant risk? What is significant risk? Definition we have seen and the examples we have seen here. And when auditor is assessing as to whether a risk is a significant risk or not, he needs to consider all these factors which are reflecting on your screen. So now, have you understood? Amritpal Kaur, please reply whether you have understood. Then Dhanlakshmi is saying she has understood. Okay. Karthik, is the linkage now clear? ठीक है? So the fourth component is what? Control activities. And control activities related to significant risk the auditor has to consider. That is why we have understood this concept of significant risk here and the topic of significant risk. The factors that auditor should consider while he is exercising a judgment as to whether a risk is significant or not is very, very important. Okay? And why these are significant risk? We have understood two examples with respect to non-routine transactions, unusual transactions like mergers and acquisitions. I gave you an example, and significant judgmental matters. Okay? Because chances of manipulations, likelihood of their occurrence is high. Okay? So let me just have a look at your query. So yes, Hiral, you are correct. Okay? So I hope the concept is clear now. Okay. So many of you are saying, ma'am, it is clear. Now the next topic, try to understand this example. After understanding this example, the definition will be clear. What control activities are there? These are the control activities now. These are going to be clear to you. Try to just understand. I'm not saying cram it. Understand. Okay? So we have done what? So is auditor required to understand all control activities? No. With respect to significant class of transaction, account balances, disclosure and relevant assertions relevant to his risk assessment of risk of material misstatement. Example are these. Then significant risks related with what is significant risk we have discussed. What are the factors to be considered? We have discussed. Okay? Example, non-routine transactions and judgmental matters we have discussed in detail. Now, the fifth and the last component which we have to discuss with respect to internal control is what? Monitoring of controls. Now, tell me, if management has implemented an internal control, designed an internal control and implemented it, but management is not monitoring as to whether such internal control is been complied with or not, will the employees comply with it? Will the working of the internal control be as effective vis-a-vis a situation whereby management is regularly monitoring the effectiveness of internal control? So obviously, where management is there to regularly assess the effectiveness of internal control, there the organization will have an effective internal control in place, right? So a very important component of internal control is monitoring of controls. See, a flower is there. I told you now that internal control is a flower. Hai? Monitoring is required. You need to see that which of the leaves or the branches are to be cut, whether it is growing properly or not, something is to be changed or not, if the roots have extended, whether this needs to be changed, the vase needs to be exchanged, the pot needs to be changed. Same way, the internal control needs to be monitored. So, very beautifully explained topic, a very crisp topic and a very important topic from your examination point of view also. So let us try to understand this topic in detail. Monitoring of control, है ना? Monitor तो monitoring करनी पड़ेगी ना, तभी तो it will work in an effective manner. So what is meant by monitoring? It is a process to assess the effectiveness of internal control at one particular time. No. Internal control performance over time during the period, whether it is effectively operating or not. Hana? Why? So that the effectiveness can be reviewed on a timely basis, and in case any remedial action is required, the same can be taken. Okay? So monitoring of control. Now, how the management monitors the control? So there are two options, either through ongoing activities or through separate evaluation, or a combination of both. What is ongoing activity? Suppose I gave you example earlier that physical verification of inventory, or let's say cash count, is what? It is a part of internal control only. It is one of the internal control. So management may observe the ongoing activity. When the concerned personnel is physically verifying the inventory, he may observe it. Ongoing activity. Or separate evaluation is that after that physical verification has been done, management may obtain the reports of that process, and then it may go through the documents inspection. The management may do that. So it can be both ways. Further, see, if let's say management has to see whether the debtors, creditors, all these parties, the internal control with respect to these account balances are effectively working or not. So management can also refer to the communication with the external parties. Okay? Let's say some complaints are there from the external party. Management may go through such communications from the external party, and that way management will be able to know as to whether the controls are effective or not. Hana? And with respect to small entity, see, in a small entity, there is, I can say, owner is the manager itself, and the number of personals are small. So the management or the owner manager, his close involvement in the operations will lead to what? Monitoring of controls. Since the owner manager, he is involved in the operations, so the monitoring of controls in case of small entities becomes what? Easier. ठीक है. So understood what is meant by monitoring, a very simple concept, but as I told you, a very important concept. Assessing the effectiveness of internal control performance over time. Why? So that you can see at the performance on a timely basis and remedial action can be taken if required. How can management do the monitoring of controls? Ongoing, separate evaluation, or a combination. Further, external party communication can also be used. Small entities may, it is easier. Why? Because of the owner manager's close involvement in operation. Let us just quickly go through the module. So the monitoring of control is what? Effectiveness of internal control performance over time. Okay. So it helps in what? Assessing the effectiveness on timely basis and taking what? Remedial action. Okay. It happens how? Ongoing activities or separate evaluations. Okay. Then it may include what? Communications with external parties like customer complaints or regulator comments. Hana? Regulator comments, let's say any income tax assessment order or any income tax demand is there from the tax authorities. So why that demand has come? Is there any internal control which is not working properly in the tax department? Okay. In case of small entities, the involvement, management's monitoring of control is often accomplished by managements or owner managers. Why owner managers? Because in small entities, owner is the management only. Na? So close involvement in operations. Okay? So I hope it is clear. Now, internal audit function we'll be doing in the next session lesson. But just try to understand. Abhi we are talking about what? External auditor. We are what? External auditors. Okay? Now, monitoring of control is what? It has been done by whom? By the management with respect to the internal control which has been implemented by the management. Now section 138 of the Companies Act is there. Companies Act 2013 is there, which requires certain class of companies to have a separate internal audit department or to appoint an internal auditor. Now in case where there is an internal audit function in the company, so what is the responsibility of the auditor? Okay? So the auditor shall obtain an understanding with respect to the internal audit department's responsibilities. What activities the internal audit department is performing and what activities the internal audit department is going to perform. Okay? So abhi ke liye just try to understand itna. Why? Because when we'll be doing section 138 in this chapter, we'll be understanding this concept in detail. Okay? And student, wherever the word auditor is been used, it means external statutory auditor. And if internal auditor is to be used, it will be used, internal word will be mentioned. Okay? So if the entity has an internal audit function, the auditor shall obtain an understanding of what? The internal audit function's responsibility and how the internal audit function fits in the entity's organizational structure. What does it mean? Whether the internal audit department or the team or the internal auditor or let's say the team, whether it is commensurate with the size of the entity. Aisa to nahi hai that entity size is so large that it need a proper internal audit team of 10 persons. However, the work of internal audit has been given to a single person. So how the internal audit function fits the entity's organization structure and the activities performed or to be performed by the internal audit function. Internal audit function is what? Internal audit department. Okay? So is it clear with respect to what? The monitoring of control. Why we are studying about internal audit function here? Because we will see when we'll be doing section 138, you will see that a company, the companies that are required to implement, to have an internal auditor, in terms of section 138. So the internal audit department, it may be given, the work to monitor the internal control, to see risk management, or to see whether the laws and regulations have been complied with. So when that internal audit department is already doing those functions, so we as external auditors, we may use the work of the internal auditor. And for that, dear students, SS 610 is there, which the responsibilities of the auditor with respect to using the work of the internal auditor are contained in SS 610. ठीक है. However, it may be possible that the internal audit department or the internal audit function is limited to operations like effectiveness, efficiency, and economy of operations. That is, they are not related to what? Financial reporting. So when the operations of the internal audit function, when the working of the internal audit function is related to financial reporting, then auditor can use the work of internal auditor by following whatever provisions are mentioned in SA 610. So that is why we are studying this concept with what? Monitoring of control. Why? Because the internal audit department may be, if the class of companies is such that the company is required to have an internal audit department, then the internal audit department also, it monitors the internal control. So auditor may use the work of the internal auditor in terms of SA 610. Okay? So I hope this concept of internal audit function and monitoring of control is also clear to all of you. Quickly tell me. Sri Nagalakshmi, what is your query? Ongoing and separate activities. See, ongoing is what? Something is, some functioning of the internal control is going on. For example, physical verification of inventory has been done by management personnel. The management, when it is what? It is monitoring the controls, it may become the part of such physical verification. It may observe such physical verification. So on the job, when it is actually happening, ongoing activity. Okay? Then what is your query? Separate evaluation. What was your query? Separate activities. So it may happen that management, what it does is, after the physical verification is done, so at that moment, monitoring of controls was not done. Later on, where the management asked for the entire file, entire records of such physical inventory count, and it just inspected those documents. So separate activities. Okay? Another example can be, see, certain exception reports are generated out of this accounting system. Let's say if if some credit is given to the parties, and some exceptions report are generated, that if it is for more than 180 days, some exception report will come. Okay? Now, separate activities can be what? Management may enter a dummy data into the system, and then it may see what reports are coming. So separately evaluating, not using the ongoing data. Okay? So Sri Nagalakshmi, is it clear? Which is point number 5? Whose query is this? Hiral, please tell me which point number 5. In case of small entities, quickly send in your reply, your query. So in case of small entities, monitoring of control, let us just have a look here. Very simple. It says management's monitoring of control is often accomplished by management's and owner managers' close involvement in operation. These involvement often will identify significant variances from expectation and inaccuracies in financial data, leading to remedial action to control. So in case of small entities, one person is controlling everything. So internal control, whatever controls are there, since the owner, the manager is himself involved in the operations, so his close involvement in the operation is itself what? Monitoring of controls. Okay? And such involvement will identify what? If any significant variances are there between the expectations, and remedial action can be taken by the owner manager then and there only. Okay? Here is it clear, Hiral? Okay? And Sri Nagalakshmi, whether your doubt is clear or not, please tell me. Okay? Now a very important topic. Tell me, when there is a satisfactory control environment, what is control environment? We have seen that management has created an environment of what? Honesty, integrity in the organization. The philosophy of management, the participation of those charged with governance. So if there is a satisfactory control environment, auditor is satisfied that the control environment is very strong. Is it an assurance that there will be no fraud? So the answer is no. Okay? So satisfactory control environment is not an absolute deterrent to fraud. What is deterrent? Prevention. So an satisfactory control environment is not an absolute deterrent to fraud. ठीक है, गारंटी थोड़ी ना है कि इफेक्टिव कंट्रोल एनवायरनमेंट है, मैनेजमेंट इज वेरी ऑनेस्ट, देयर इज अ कल्चर ऑफ ऑनेस्टी एंड दोज चार्ज विद गवर्नेंस इन्वॉल्वमेंट है, बहुत अच्छा है सब कुछ, बट दिस इज नॉट अ गारंटी ना. Deterrent is what? Prevention of fraud. So it is not a guarantee. ठीक है. So you may get a question, a descriptive question can come, and I have also given you a question on this, that satisfactory control environment is not an absolute deterrent to fraud. Explain. ठीक है. So let us try to understand. Remedial action is what? Corrective action. Sudhanshu. ठीक है. So see, if there is a satisfactory control environment, what is control environment? You have understood, it is one of the components of internal control. ठीक है. Internal control needs a good environment in order to work effectively. ठीक है. Now the environment is good, it is satisfactory. So is it an assurance that there will be no fraud? No. So how to understand this? See, if there is a satisfactory control environment, this is a positive factor when the auditor is assessing the risk of material misstatement. Okay? We have seen that we need to obtain an understanding of all these components. So it will act as what? A positive factor for the auditor. Okay? Why? Because it will help to reduce the risk of fraud. कि control environment अच्छा है. If control environment is good, chances are there that the internal controls are also effective. So it reduces the risk of fraud. Okay? However, it is not an absolute assurance to deterrent to fraud. Deterrent is what? It will not assure you that fraud will be prevented. Okay? And in fact, if the control environment is not good, it undermines the effectiveness of what? Internal control. Okay? Let's say a fully automated in accounting system is being used by the organization. Okay? Now, what is control environment? The management philosophy. Okay? Now, let's say management fails to provide sufficient resources to address certain IT security risk. Management is not, too much keen towards investing towards what? IT security. Now, if this happens, so control environment is weak, it will undermine the effectiveness. Why? Because if there is a risk on the IT system, if the passwords are weak, any person can enter the system and can make XYZ any entry. So if management's attitude towards the IT security risk is not as is required, so it will undermine the effectiveness of what? Internal control. Okay? So now you may ask, ma'am, if satisfactory control environment is not an absolute prevention to fraud, then why auditor is understanding it? Why? Because based on an understanding of control environment, auditor will be able to understand the effectiveness of internal control. And based on such understanding of internal control, he would be in a position to understand the nature, timing, and extent of audit procedure which are to be performed as per SA 330. Further, this understanding of control environment, it helps the auditor in assessing the risk of material misstatement. Okay? So if a question comes that since a satisfactory control environment is not an absolute deterrent to fraud, so it is not necessary for the auditor to understand. So the answer is no. Why? Because though the satisfactory control environment is not an absolute deterrent to fraud, but it acts as a positive factor in auditor's assessment of risk of material misstatement, and based on his assessment regarding the control environment, regarding internal control, then only he can decide his nature, timing, extent of audit procedures. Okay? So is it clear? So the existence of a satisfactory control environment can be what? It can be a positive factor to assess the risk of material misstatement. However, although it would help to reduce the risk of material misstatement, but it is not an absolute deterrent. Deterrent is what? Prevention. Conversely, deficiencies in control environment may undermine the effectiveness of internal control. How? This example. Management's failure to commit sufficient resources to address IT security risk may adversely affect internal control by allowing improper changes to be made to computer programs or data or unauthorized transactions. As explained in Essay 330, what is Essay 330? The auditor's responses to assessed risk. Chapter number 2. You all have already done this concept. The control environment also influences the nature, timing, extent of auditors' further procedures. So the control environment, a very important line, you may get it as a true or false or MCQ or a descriptive type of question. The control environment in itself does not prevent or detect and correct a material misstatement. So I may give you a true of correct, incorrect. That a control environment in itself prevents or detects and corrects a material misstatement. So the answer is no. Okay. So what is the benefit of a satisfactory control environment? It helps in auditor's assessment of risk of material misstatement and further to decide as to what should be the NTE of audit procedures. Okay. So I hope this topic is also clear. So with this, we have finished all the 5 components of internal control. We started with control environment, then entities risk assessment process, information system, control activities. Control activities may we did a very important topic of significant risk, monitoring of control, whereby we did another topic related to it, which was what? Internal audit function. Okay? And then whether a control environment is an absolute deterrent to fraud. So the answer is no. So is it clear? And Sudhanshu, with respect to remedial action is corrective action. So is your doubt clear? Karthik, you are absolutely correct. Okay? So students, quickly send in your reply whether everything is clear or not, whatever we have done so far. Okay? Quickly tell me. Now the next topic is evaluation of internal control by the auditor. Now quickly tell me, what do you understand by the term evaluation? Evaluation of internal control by the auditor. Evaluation. I need answers from all of you. So Karthik is saying clear, Kota is saying clear, Dhanalakshmi, Hitesh, Hiral, Radhika, everything is clear. Good. Sudhanshu is saying clear. Students, understanding is required. Along with that, learning the keywords is also required. Right? So try to learn also, and please after the session go through the module in entirety. I'm repeating it again and again. So evaluation is to assess the quality or judging the quality . Judging the quality of internal control. Okay? Judging, or you can say assessing. So now you will say, okay, this is evaluating, judging the quality, but abhi tak kya pad rahe the? Abhi tak, what were we doing? We were understanding the control. What is the design? What is the implementation? है ना? Internal control क्या है in an organization? वो understand किया. But is that understanding sufficient? No. We as auditors, we also need to evaluate, that is to judge the quality of internal control. है ना? We need to evaluate what? The quality of internal control. And see, evaluation of internal control, it is a very important part. when the auditor is deciding as to what audit procedures he needs to perform. Quickly tell me, you have done this concept in your chapter number 2. There is one concept which has a series of actions or instructions or the procedures that the auditor needs to perform. What is that called? Quickly tell me, what is that called? So, audit program. Remember? So see, when the auditor is making an overall audit program as to what audit procedure he needs to perform, unless and until he is sure about the quality of an internal control, he won't be able to decide his audit procedures. Okay? See, auditor needs a reasonable assurance with respect to accounting system. And once he has obtained an understanding of the internal control, he will be able to make such assessment. Okay? So after abhi tak we have understood what the design and implementation. Now we are understanding as to about the quality of the internal control. Once the auditor has understood about the quality of the internal control, he is in a position to determine the nature, timing, extent of the audit procedure. So students, audit program, number of you have answered it correctly. Okay? So audit program. Now what is the benefit of evaluation of internal control? बहुत simple है, बहुत basic है, बहुत simple points है. ठीक है? What are the benefits of evaluation of internal control to the auditor when the auditor is evaluating, assessing the quality? ठीक है? अब देखो internal control तो है, but the quality is not good. It is not effective. Will it be able to locate the errors and frauds? No. So unless and until auditor evaluates an internal control, कि है कैसा है, ये वाला डिजाइन है, ये वाला इम्प्लीमेंटेशन है, पूरा साल काम भी कर रहा है, पर क्वालिटी कैसी है? Is it effective enough or not to locate the errors and fraud? So what are the benefits of evaluation of internal control? पहले understand कर लिया ना, है ना? Auditor has obtained an understanding. Let me just take you through that topic again. Where was it? Nature and extent of understanding of relevant control. क्या क्या समझा था? Design, implementation. कि कंट्रोल एग्जिस्ट करता है ना, यूज तो हो रहा है ना, अभी तक वी हैव अंडरस्टूड दैट. नाउ इवैल्यूएशन, उसका क्वालिटी भी तो देखना है ना. कंट्रोल तो बहुत लगा रखी है, बट द क्वालिटी इज नॉट गुड. देन कैन ऑडिटर रिलाई ऑन सच कंट्रोल? नो. ठीक है? सो दैट इज व्हाई बेनिफिट्स ऑफ इवैल्यूएशन ऑफ इंटरनल कंट्रोल टू द auditor. So first and foremost, auditor will be when auditor evaluates an internal control, it will enable the auditor to know whether errors and frauds are likely to be located in the ordinary course of operations. ठीक है? इंटरनल कंट्रोल की क्वालिटी कैसी है, क्या ये एरर्स एंड फ्रॉड्स को डिटेक्ट कर पाएगा टाइमली बेसिस पर, है ना? Whether adequate internal control system is in use and operating as planned by the management. जो मैनेजमेंट ने प्लान किया था, पहले हमने अंडरस्टैंडिंग ले ली व्हाट इज द डिजाइन, ठीक है, वो यूज भी हो रहा है, पर जैसा मैनेजमेंट ने चाहा था, इज इट वर्किंग लाइक दैट ओनली, है ना? वेदर इफेक्टिव इंटरनल ऑडिटिंग डिपार्टमेंट इज ऑपरेटिंग और नॉट, है ना? when we are evaluating internal control, we are also evaluating what monitoring of internal control, and we have seen monitoring of internal control में internal audit function को भी consider करेंगे. So whether internal audit department is operating or not, ठीक है? Whether there is any administrative control that has a bearing on his work. For example, let us try to understand this with the help of an example. See, when we as an auditor, we were understanding and evaluating the control with respect to wages, we saw that with respect to the recruitment and enrollment of the workers, the internal control are weak. Now, in this case, though the internal control on recruitment and enrollment of workers is an administrative kind of control. It is not related to financial control, internal control. But chances are there that since the recruitment or enrollment control is weak, dummy workmen may be there, which may have an impact on what? Wages. So auditor might have to consider such administrative control also. So when the auditor is evaluating the internal control, tabhi to he'll be able to understand that whether any administrative control has a bearing on his work, bearing effect on his work. For example, if the control over worker recruitment and enrollment is weak, there is a likelihood of dummy names, fake names being included in wage sheet, and this is relevant for the auditor. So abhi what we are doing, we are evaluating quality dekh rahe hain. ठीक है. So whether controls adequately safeguard the assets, control हैं, effectively work कर रहे हैं, ये हमने पहले देख लिया. ठीक है. But whether they are such that they are able to safeguard the assets or not. ठीक है. How far and how adequately management is discharging in functions relating to recording of transactions. Recording of transactions जैसा होना चाहिए था वैसा कर रहे हैं. Records, reports, whatever are getting generated, whether these are reliable or not. है ना. तो अभी तक what we have tried to understand that the internal control, the quality is good or not with respect to the area of work where they have been implemented by the management. Now the next points relate to as to what work the auditor has to do. When once the auditor evaluates the quality of an internal control, he is in a position to decide as to whether he needs to go for a detailed checking or he can rely on the quality of the internal control. So the extent and depth of examination that he needs to carry out. What would be appropriate audit technique? What are the areas where control is weak and where it is excessive? So if you can see, these points relate to what ki auditor ka ab work kaise hona chahiye. And last but not the least, whether any suggestions can be given to improve the control. So I can say that with respect to all these 7 points, abhi tak kya tha ki management mein jo internal control jo company mein laga hua hai, whether that is able to locate the error and fraud, whether it is effective or not, operating internal or auditing department ठीक है नहीं, administrative control का कोई impact है, whether the internal control is able to safeguard the asset, management जो भी recording of transaction कर रहा है, whether it is reliable, reports records reliable है, and 8th onwards what has been discussed, that now based on that what auditor has to do. In-depth examination चाहिए क्या? What audit technique will be required? What are the areas where control are weak? What suggestions can be given to the management for the improvement? Simple, very general points, Hana. So with this, we have done this topic also. Let us just have a look at illustration 9. Mr. H, a team member of the auditor of 3 There and Here Limited, was of the view that evaluation of internal control of the company would help in identifying areas where internal control is weak. Advice. So yes, this is absolutely correct. Okay? The review of internal controls will enable the auditor to know what are the areas where internal control are weak and where it is excessive. Is it clear? So is it clear? I wanted to discuss one, just a minute. One illustration with you. So let's see. Maybe it will come later on. Okay. So tell me quickly, is it clear whatever we have done so far? Quickly tell me whether whatever we have done so far, evaluation samajh aaya, how is it different from the earlier topic of nature and extent of understanding of internal control? वहां पर क्या समझा था? Design, implementation. Now what we are doing, we are evaluating, we are assessing the quality. कैसा है? Implement तो हो गया, design तो हो गया, but क्या ये वाकई में in actuality is whether it is able to work the way management wanted it to work. ठीक है? So that was the topic. So tell me, is it clear or not? और कोई डाउट है तो क्विकली सेंडिंग योर डाउट. ठीक है. नाउ माय क्वेरी टू यू, टेल मी इफ when let's say I am making audit program for the audit engagement, ठीक है, and I do not obtain any understanding of the internal control. Now what will happen? Audit program में क्या लिखते हैं? What all audit procedures I need to perform. ठीक है. Now tell me, without understanding the internal control, if I, and it is a big company having a based its system on what? Internal control. But I do not understand the internal control and I start making my internal audit program. Now what will happen? Tell me. Indispensable, absolutely necessary. Evaluation, I think it is mentioned. Whose doubt is this? Sri Nagal Lakshmi. Indispensable is absolutely necessary. Absolutely necessary. ठीक है. So tell me, I have asked you a question. Where were we? We were discussing how. If I make an audit program without understanding the internal control, so why, Hitesh, the auditor will not be able to do the audit properly? Students, see, whatever question is asked, now try to give answer for that only. This is what happens in exams also. You are asked something related to a topic. You do not see what is asked. You start writing about that topic. Listen to the question or read the question carefully. क्या पूछा है? वो टॉपिक के बारे में सब कुछ नहीं बताना है ना. When I asked you about the audit program, अभी मैंने क्या पूछा? That if I start preparing an audit program without understanding internal control, so one of you are saying that that audit program do not provide sufficient appropriate audit. ये सब नहीं बताना ना. Audit program के बारे में I have not asked you a question. I've said that if I start preparing an audit program without actually understanding the internal control, what will happen? ठीक है. Bindu Sai Lakshmi, you are correct. ठीक है. Now see, students, let's say there is a company having, let's say it has factories, where workers are there, and wages are given to the workers in cash. ठीक है. On daily wage workers are there. ठीक है. Now there are, let's say, more than 20,000 workers. ठीक है. And internal control has been implemented by the organization. Now, when we as auditor, we have assessed control risk and then we test the control in order to see when we have assessed the control risk, and then we decide that we need to rely on the internal control. Okay? And when we decide that we will be relying, our audit strategy is what? That we will perform what? Test of control, in order to see whether they are actually operating effectively or not. Okay? When they are operating effectively, what we can do is we are relying on them and they are operating effectively also. We have conducted test of controls. We will reduce our substantive procedures with respect to wages. Why? Because we are relying on internal control. Now take a situation whereby more than 20,000 workers are there. Daily wages are being paid in cash. and I am not understanding the internal control. Now, when I'm preparing my audit program, when I'm writing the audit procedures that I need to perform, I will mention there that for, let's say, a month, I need to check all the wages that has been paid for each month. So I am devoting my time, maximum of my time, on vouching all the wages which has been made. Why? Because I'm not relying on the internal control. Had this been the situation that I'm relying on the internal control, what would have been done? I'm relying on the internal control. I have tested the internal control. They are working effectively. I'll reduce my sample for checking. So my substantive procedures will be on that sample. But since in this case, the example that I gave, I said that I am not understanding the internal control. So when I am not having any understanding of the internal control, I'll keep on checking all the wages in detail. And I will not be able to concentrate on the other areas, because my maximum resource, my maximum time is spent on what? Checking the wages. So in that way, my audit program becomes what? Unwieldy. What is meant by unwieldy? Unmanageable. Unmanageable. Manage नहीं हो रहा ना? Unnecessarily heavy. Why? Because उसमें क्या लिखा हुआ है? Unnecessary. I'm doing vouching. I'm doing detailed checking of all the wages, though it was not required. Why? Because the internal control were effective. So a satisfactory understanding of internal control is must when we as auditor, we are drafting what? Our audit program. Otherwise, see what is written. The object of the audit may be lost altogether. In the mass of entries and vouchers, we will keep on checking the entries. We will keep on checking the vouchers. Let's take another situation whereby I have checked the internal control and they are working effectively. Now, what I can do is I can randomly pick the vouchers and I can check them on sample basis. Then applying the sampling techniques, I'll be able to conclude with respect to whether the wages are being properly dealt in the books of accounts or not. Okay? So we need to consider what? Internal control before formulating our audit program. Is it clear? Is it clear? Now, when we understood the concept of what? Evaluation of internal control, students, what was it? We were understanding the quality of the internal control. Okay? We have understood that we need to understand the internal control in order to draft our audit program, in order to decide the nature, timing, extent of our audit procedure. Now, there are 4 methods with respect to evaluation of internal control. See, first of all, tell me, how will it start? How will you evaluate an internal control? Quickly tell me, कैसे होएगा? इंटरनल कंट्रोल इवैल्यूएट कैसे होएगा? बताओ. One answer I'll give. For example, there is some accounting system, a new accounting software that has been implemented in the organization. So what I can do as an auditor, when I'm evaluating the quality, when I'm understanding the internal control, I can ask the management that management, you must be having some manual as to how this accounting software, how this accounting system operates. So I can read the company manuals. I can study the organization charts, the various flow charts that are made, and I can make certain inquiries to the officers, employees of the company. I can ask them as to how the internal control works. So evaluation, when you are understanding the internal control, if you remember risk assessment procedure में भी तो यही perform किया था ना, inquiry, inspection, inspecting what company manuals can be done, studying organization chart, inquiries of what officers and employees of the organization. So inquiry to internal auditor, which is absolutely correct here. Then ठीक है, ठीक है. Now we will be studying about 4 methods. See, when you are inquiring, when you are going through the manuals, is it possible to remember each and everything? You need to collect, you need to accumulate the data, you need to write it, है ना? And what are the 4 methods? These are narrative record, checklist, questionnaire, and flowchart. ठीक है? So we'll be discussing all these 4 in detail. So we will do one thing. We'll take a break of 10 minutes here. But before that, homework for the break is there. Just after the break, tell me what is meant by narrative. ठीक है? And meanwhile, if any of you have any doubt with respect to the topics which we have covered in chapter number 4 so far, you can send in your reply, your queries. And there were 2 queries which I said that I'll be taking in the next session or at the second half of the session. So students, if you can just resend your queries. Okay? So here we will take a short break of 10 minutes and I want an answer that what is meant by narrative according to you. Okay? So a break of 10 minutes. ब्रेक है ना 10 मिनट्स का. So I hope students, you all are back after the break, and I can see a number of you have replied as to what is meant by narrative. So you have written that it is a brief description, a description or explanation, Hannah. So what we are discussing, so before starting with it, let me just take two queries. Hiral is saying, ma'am, what is meant by efficacy of control, internal control? Efficacy is what? Effectiveness. Hannah. Then there is a query, what is meant by to acquaint? Acquaint is to get familiar, to familiarize. Okay? Then there is a query with respect to what is meant by assimilation. It means to understand, assimilate the internal control, to fully understand the internal control. I hope whoever has asked all these things is clear. Okay. Now, we were discussing regarding evaluation of internal control. Okay. Now, when we are evaluating the internal control, okay, one of you were asking, ma'am, can we perform audit procedures while evaluating? Yes, we can. But how to gather all that information? Okay. So those methods are given, which are what? Narrative record, checklist, questionnaire, and flowchart. Okay. Now what is meant by narrative record? So we narrate a story, that is describing something. Okay. So what an auditor does is, when he evaluates the internal control, he might have performed certain testing, he might have, observed certain processes. He will write the description of each and everything in detail, in paragraphs. So narrative, if you look at the dictionary meaning of the term narrative, it means writing in line. Narrative, it means writing, to write line by line, just line by line in paragraphs. Hannah, I told you, example of what? Narrating a story. Okay? So when the auditor is evaluating the internal control, or the team is evaluating the internal control, so they are giving a complete exhaustive description of the system as found in operation by the auditor. So the internal control is working, Hannah. So the team, the audit or the audit team member who is evaluating the internal control, he may observe with his eyes as to how the internal control is working, or he may perform certain actual testing, he may perform certain procedures, and then whatever are the results of his observation or of the audit procedures that he has performed, he will write each and everything, that this happened, then this happened. So each and everything in detail. So a complete and exhaustive description, each and everything. Exhaustive is what? Covering each and everything of the system found in operation by the auditor. So before that, before writing, obviously he'll observe or he'll perform certain procedures, that is actual testing. But see, students, where there are complex internal control, huge internal control, their narrative record is not possible. In case of large organizations, you cannot just keep on writing each and everything where there are complex internal control. So it is saying that it is recommended in cases where no formal control system is in operation and would be more suited for what? Small businesses. जहाँ छोटा सा internal control है, छोटा सा company है, वहाँ पे narrative record is possible. ठीक है? Now, what are the basic disadvantages? To comprehend. Comprehend is what? To understand the system in operation is quite detailed. Like you'll be writing each and every aspect of internal control, which is difficult to understand the entire system. Okay? Then to identify weaknesses and gaps in the system. See, paragraphs, a number of paragraphs are written. Is it possible to identify where is the weakness or the gap written? No. ठीक है. And last but not the least, to incorporate changes arising on account of reshuffling of manpower. Let's say there are two shifts in the client factory. ठीक है. Morning shift, you have maintained the entire narrative record, the entire description. Now, when the night shift comes, there is a substantial change in the way they work. Now you will have to write again. Why? Because you cannot make a change in that thing only. Why? Because it is written in paragraph form, in descriptive form. Okay? So these are certain disadvantages. And what is narrative record? A complete, exhaustive description of the system. How will the auditor write it or the auditor write it? First of all, they'll observe or they'll perform certain actual testing. Then whatever they have observed, whatever testing they have done, whatever they have found about the internal control in operation in the organization, they will keep it in writing line by line in paragraph form. Okay? Exhaustive is a complete list. Nothing is left. Exhaustive list. Okay? Yes, writing a story, a kind of writing a story as to पहले ये होता है फिर ये होता है. So it is a cumbersome process ना. इतना सारा आप लिखोगे narrative record. But yes, it is suitable for what? Small businesses or where there are no formal control system in place. ठीक है. Second is what? Checklist. As the name suggests, check the list. है ना? A list is given. The auditing staff is required to tick against all these list items. Okay? So let's say there is an example, see it is written. For example, a staff is conducting the checking of, he is checking the internal control with respect to purchases. So there is a list given of these 5 points, that, and the options will be yes, no, or not applicable. So the audit staff needs to mention, like when he's observing or he's checking the internal control with respect to purchases, he needs to see, are tenders called before placing orders? So if it is yes, he'll tick here. And these are what? Are purchases made on the basis of written order? Let's say it's no. Is purchase order form standardized? Let's say no. Are purchase order forms numbered? Yes. Are inventory control maintained by the person who have nothing to do with custody or receipt of inventory or inspection of inventory or purchase of inventory? Basically, this point is asking for what? Segregation of duty. Let's say it is not applicable. And the person, the audit team member who has done this, he will be putting the initials. By initials, so that the responsibility is fixed. So check the list which is given. Okay? It is to be filled by who? By one of the auditing staffs, whoever is looking at the process. So what is it? It is a series of instructions and or questions which a member of the auditing staff, you may get a question that a checklist is to be filled by the client. No, it is to be filled by whom? The auditing staff must follow or answer. When he completes the instruction, he initials the space against the instruction. Answers are usually yes, no, or not applicable. Example, this purchases wala example. Then what will happen? This will become part of what? Audit documentation, and it will be studied by whom? The principal or the senior. So the complete checklist is studied by the principal manager senior to understand the existence, to ascertain the existence of internal control and evaluating its implementation and efficiencies. Are you able to understand? Check the list which has been given. Who will do that? It will be done by the auditing staff. How? He will look at the process and there are options given. Yes, no, not applicable. The same will be done and he will be putting the initials. Okay? Now, a similar thing to it is what? Internal control questionnaire. So some questions are given, but now these are to be filled by the client, the personnel of the client, the concerned personnel in the client entity. So what is it? This is a comprehensive series of questions concerning internal control. Okay? This is most widely used about existence, operation, efficiency of internal control in an organization. So how does it work? The questionnaire is usually issued to the client and the client is requested to fill it up by concerned executives and employees. And here the options are what? Yes, no, or not applicable. So the almost these are the same, but checklist is to be filled in by the auditing staff, है ना? They will check the list कि ये कर लिया, ये check कर लिया, ये check कर लिया, and here in case of internal control questionnaire, certain questions are asked, है ना? Thereby answer in yes, no or not applicable is to be given by the client organization. ठीक है? The personnel, the person who is looking at that process. ठीक है? What are the benefits of internal control questionnaire? So first of all, see, when questions are framed, let's say with respect to purchases, certain questions are given to the purchases personnel. So chances of omission of significant control review procedures is less, because you are drafting a question. Narrative record nahi hai na ki anything important will be overlooked. You are simply asking certain questions. So chances that any important significant control review procedure will be left is less. ठीक है? And if a proper questionnaire is given, na, suppose you give a questionnaire relating to purchases personnel, you give a questionnaire relating to sales personnel. So at one time, a number of work can be done. ठीक है ना? So all internal control evaluation can be completed at one time or in sections. ठीक है? कैसे भी कर सकते हो, all work together. ठीक है? And review can be done more easily. Now the principal has a internal control questionnaire in his front, whereby he can just see that everything, let's say with respect to purchases, is there, and it is framed in such a way that yes means a satisfactory answer. So he can quickly see now that wherever no is mentioned on correct, so he'll be able to review it very quickly, and it will disclose what? The control defects. ठीक है? So is it clear? Internal control questionnaire. Perusal is study. Dhanalakshmi, peruse, to study, to read. ठीक है? Now what is meant by flowchart? What is a flowchart? So what basically the auditor or the audit team is doing here, they are evaluating the internal control. Now I told you when we started discussing that keeping everything here is not possible ना, कि हाँ मुझे याद है कि internal control was like that. Yeah, the quality of internal control is like that. It is able to detect the errors or fraud. Yeah, at this point it was not able to detect the error or fraud. So what is the better way to keep everything in writing? And what are the four methods? Narrative record, which is a complete description, complete exhaustive description. These are the keywords. Hana? Then we did what? Checklist, which is to be filled by whom? The auditing staff. Then we did internal control questionnaire, which is to be filled by whom? The client. And then we are doing what? A flow chart. Now, what is a flow chart? If it gives a flow of the internal control, how the internal control works, it basically gives a bird's eye view that this is the structure of the internal control. Hana? So it is a graphic presentation of each part of company system of internal control. And it is the most concise way of recording the auditor's review of the system. कि पहले ये हुआ, instead of writing it by using arrows, by using flow charts, everything is shown. It minimizes the amount of narrative explanation. Obviously, now you are not writing the paragraphs. It gives a bird's eye view. Okay? And this way, if some flow charts are made, so what are the benefits? It helps the auditor to study the significant features of the business, the nature of the activities and various channels of goods, materials, cash. Like with respect to purchases, with respect to sales, cash, different flow charts are made. How the internal control with respect to particular transactions are carried out. Hana? So it gives a bird's eye view. Okay? This will help the auditor to understand and evaluate the internal control in the correct perspective, in the correct direction. So this is what is flow chart. Let us just have a look at illustration 10. In order to evaluate the internal control of your and my limited, a team member of the auditors used a method according to which Number of questions relating to internal control of the company were required to be answered by the employees of the company. Required to be answered by whom? Employees. After obtaining the answers, there was a discussion to the answers between team members of the auditor and employees of the company for a clear picture. State the method of evaluation. Now quickly tell me, without looking at the answer, what is the method of evaluation? Karthik Gupta is saying, ma'am, how can we rely on internal control questionnaire? See, ऐसे तो all the information in the financial statement is given by the management ना. So we will be doing our checking. ऐसे थोड़ी ना we have just given, we are performing our procedures also. है ना? We will be obtaining the audit evidence later when we'll be performing substantive procedures. है ना? Otherwise, Karthik, ऐसे तो everything has been provided by the management. Na? That is why we obtain written representation, management representation letter, which you have done in chapter number 3. Clear, Karthik? So, Rajan S, please check your answer. This is internal control question here, because it is mentioned number of questions are there which are to be answered by the employees. If it would have been mentioned the number of questions are there which is to be filled in by whom? By the staff, auditing staff. So it would have been what? Your checklist. Healthy and Useful Limited is into a small manufacturing as well as trading business for the purpose of evaluating the internal control of Healthy and Usual Limited. Healthy and Useful Limited. I am at illustration 11. A team member of the auditors of the company used a method according to which the whole description of internal control, whole description, the keyword is description, that was operating was to be recorded. Identify the method of evaluation. Do not look at the answer. Quickly. So it is what? Narrative record method. Okay? So with this we have done what are the various methods of evaluation of internal control. So today what we will do, first of all, come to page number 4.31. So formulating an audit program after understanding an internal control. Okay? So I want you to go through this example right now. So basically what is it saying? That what will be the impact if internal control, let's say it is not good. What will happen? So just go through the example, normally wala paragraph, and on the other hand. See, Sri Ram, it is mentioned here na, that the most commonly used method is what? Most widely used form is ICQ. 4.3 paragraph it is written. I've asked you to read this. Here is small entity is a small entity, and trading entity to the entity involved in trading na, which is not manufacturing. It can be big or small. Sushil Kumar, method of evaluation of internal control includes your flowchart also. Sri Ram, is your doubt clear? So why have I asked you to read this? Because there was a question that when the internal controls are considered weak in some areas, so what the auditor should do? So in a situation where internal controls are considered weak in some areas, the auditor might choose an auditing procedure or test that otherwise might not be required. So let's say the internal control with respect to purchases are weak. So ऐसा थोड़ी ना that the auditor will not rely on any internal control. What he can do, if the internal control with respect to other areas are effective, he can rely on them. And if the internal control with respect to purchases are weak, he may go for extensive checking with respect to purchases. He will not rely on internal control with respect to that. So see, example, normally the distribution of wages is not observed by the client, but if the internal control over wages is so weak that there exists a possibility of dummy workers. If you remember, we did a topic of what administrative control is, whether the administrative control has a bearing on auditor's work. Then the auditor might include observation of wages distribution in his program in order to find out the workers who do not turn out for the receipt of wages. On the other hand, if he is satisfied with the internal control on sales and trade receivables, the auditor can get trade receivable balances confirmed at almost any time reasonably close to the balance sheet date. But if control is weak, तो क्या करना है? He may feel that he should get the confirmation exactly on the date of year closing so that he may eliminate the risk of errors and frauds occurring between the intervening period. What is intervening period? The date on which he obtains the confirmation and the balance sheet date. Also, he may in this situation decide to have a larger coverage of trade receivable by the confirmation procedure. तो ऐसा नहीं है that if any of the control, internal control with respect to particular area is weak, तो internal control को रेफर ही नहीं करना है. नहीं, rest of the areas में तो auditor can rely, but with respect to that particular area where the internal control is not effective as per auditor's professional judgment, he can simply go for an extensive checking, pick up a larger sample size, है ना? He will specifically check the year-end transactions there. ठीक है? Is it clear? Hiral, with reference to what are you asking these questions? See, Radhika, dummy workman means that there are no workers, but dummy names are mentioned. So that way the wages are increased, the expenses get increased. However, such cash is, misappropriated. Now, it is not been given to the workers. Why? Because the workers to exist in karte, they are dummy, they are fake names. See, Anil Kumar, I did not say when I gave you an example with respect to wages that the auditor, I did not say that the auditor is not required to check the wages. He is required to check the wages because it is one of the items of the P&L account. Hana? But what I meant at that time is, if the internal controls are effective, then I as an auditor, I can rely on it and I can check the wages on sampling basis. I'll select some samples. Okay? If in my professional judgment, the internal controls are effective, I may check the internal controls and then if I'm satisfied, I'll select the wages paid on sample basis and do the checking on sampling basis. Okay? On the other hand, if obviously the internal controls are not effective, then I'll not rely on internal control with respect to wages and I'll do a detailed checking. And if you remember, I gave an example that volume of transactions are there. More than 20,000 workers are there. Every month, every day, in fact, the payments have been made. So where the volume of transaction is high and only substantive procedure won't give me sufficient appropriate audit evidence, then I will have to rely on the internal control. And for that, I need to check the internal control, whether it is operating effectively or not. So Anil Kumar, is it clear? Sri Naga Lakshmi, please send your query again. What is your query? Sri Naga Lakshmi, I cannot see your query here. So, Anil Kumar, is your doubt clear? Okay, Anil is saying his doubt is clear. So what I'll do is we will stop for now, but we'll be discussing the questions, the correct, incorrect, which I have uploaded also. I hope you all have gone through these questions. So answer to question number 1 quickly. I need answer. Just write 1 and C for correct, I for incorrect. Audit risk is the function of inherent risk and detection risk. Quickly send in your replies. I have stopped here and I'm discussing the questions because many of you were saying since the first section of chapter number 4 that ma'am, please discuss some of the MCQ, some of the questions. So we will cover the rest of the chapter. 15 pages are left in the next session. Sudhanshu, please check your answers. Audit risk is a function of inherent risk and detection risk. See, audit risk is the function of risk of material misstatement and detection risk, whereby risk of material misstatement is the function of inherent risk and control risk. So here you can say if control risk was also mentioned, then it would have been correct, but it is what? Incorrect. Sahu, please check your answer. Audit risk. Let me just show this to you in the module. Just a minute. So, see, it is mentioned here. Audit risk is a function of risk of material misstatement and detection risk. ठीक है? Is it clear? Question number 2, please send in your replies. Inherent risk refers to the susceptibility of an assertion about the class of transaction, account, balance, or disclosure to a misstatement that can be material either individually or when aggregated with misstatement after consideration of any related control. So what is not correct in this statement? So the answer is what? Incorrect. Absolutely right. The answer is incorrect. Now tell me what is not correct in this statement. So it is mentioned inherent risk refers to the susceptibility of an assertion about a class of transaction to a misstatement, which is absolutely correct. But the word after, it should be what? Before. Risk of material misstatement is prior to audit and inherent risk is what? Before consideration of any related control. So students, please read the question in entirety. Hana? I'm sure all those who are saying correct, they must not have read the last line. Before consideration of any related control. Check your answers. Third one, when efficiency of internal control of an entity is high, the control risk is also high. Tell me. Students, in the exam, you are also supposed to write the reason. So in the second statement, I can see Sri Ram has written it very correctly as to how to write. So you will be writing incorrect, and what will be the reasoning? You will be writing this entire line again, but instead of after, you will be writing what? Before consideration of any related control. Okay? Same way, the answer to question number 3 is what? Incorrect. Why? Because there is an inverse relationship. So you can write there is an inverse relationship between the efficiency of internal control and the control risk. So when the efficiency of internal control of an entity is high, the control risk is what? Low. ठीक है, इज इट क्लियर? ठीक है, सुशील, निकिता, श्रीराम, किरण, सुधांशु, धनलक्ष्मी, हिरल, साहू, साहू, check your answer. राधिका बंसल, कार्तिक, अमृतपाल, कार्तिक, correct. Read the question. Karthik will discuss that also. So read the question properly. So the fourth question. Significant risks are inherent risks with both higher likelihood of occurrence and higher magnitude of potential misstatement. So let us just have a look at this from the chapter so that you are able to understand as to how you may get any line from the module as your correct, incorrect, or your MCQs or descriptive question. So we have done this topic today only. So significant risks are inherent risks with both a higher likelihood of occurrence and a higher magnitude of potential misstatement. ठीक है? The auditor assesses assertions affected by significant risk as higher in inherent risk. The following are always significant risk. So you can write this in the reasoning. ठीक है, Karthik? Is it clear? So the fourth one is correct. Send in your replies with respect to the fifth one. The control environment in itself does not prevent or detect and correct a material misstatement. It may, however, influence the auditor's evaluation of effectiveness of other controls and thereby auditor's assessment of the risk of material misstatement. So this is what this is. Send in your replies with respect to question number 5. So students, वैसे तो अभी do not refer to it, but in the answer sheet ना, I mentioned the answers. ठीक है, for your future reference, not now. अभी तो try to solve these questions on your own. So send your replies with respect to question number 5. Reasoning is required, Mr. Anil Kumar. ठीक है, so the answer to fifth question is also correct. So you can write here that satisfactory control environment is not an absolute deterrent to fraud. ठीक है, so for all those who are asking ma'am how to write the reasoning when the answer is correct, so you can write that satisfactory control environment is not a absolute deterrent to fraud. It is a positive factor, है ना? Let us just look at the module. What is this topic? This is 4. It is here. 4.28. ठीक है ना? So you can write this. The existence of this is a, however, it helps to reduce, but it is not. So this can be mentioned in the reasoning. ठीक है? Is it clear? Now with respect to sixth question, please send in your replies. So Menon, is it clear how to write the reasoning? Internal control questionnaire is a series of instructions questions which a member of the auditing staff must follow or answer no. Internal control questionnaire कौन fill करता है? Client. So the answer is what? Incorrect. है ना? So how to write the reasoning? You can write the definition of ICQ. You can write the definition of checklist. ठीक है. 7. Internal control can provide an entity with absolute assurance about the entities achieving the entity's financial reporting objectives. Send in your replies with respect to question number 7. Student, read the question carefully because these questions may appear to be simple, and just look at the questions. These lines are picked up from the module. ठीक है, but unless and until you read them with concentration and the entire question, it might happen that you have missed any important word. So here the word here, the keyword here is what? Absolute. So absolute होता है. So let me just show you in the module from where I have picked up this question. Internal control can provide only what? Reasonable assurance. ठीक है? Can provide only with reasonable assurance about achieving the entity's financial reporting objective. So how will you write the reasoning? Instead of absolute, you will be writing what? Reasonable. So this is incorrect. Why? Because it should be what? Reasonable. Is it clear? Yes, here are both definitions. ठीक है? Is it clear? Pooja, what is your query? You are asking me whether my queries are reaching you. I cannot see any of your query before this query. So please send your query again. ठीक है? Now question number 8. Acha, this we will be doing in the next class. Question number 9. Leave question number 8 for now and go to question number 9. Send in your replies. So risk of material misstatement consists of two components, namely control risk and detection risk. So what is the answer? Question number 9. Please try to answer the questions on your own. So the answer is incorrect. So two components are there. So don't get confused. आधा पढ़ के true मत लिख देना. It is incorrect. यहीं तक पढ़कर उसको true मत लिख देना. ठीक है? Why? Because this should have been what? Inherent risk. So how to write the reasoning? Now to you all know. ठीक है? Now the 10th one, control risk is a function of effectiveness of the design, implementation and maintenance of internal control by management. If I would have written here by auditor, then it would have been incorrect. Abhi it is what? Correct. ठीक है? Is it clear? So just a minute, let me just open the MCQ sheet also. So, is it clear? Chalo, good. I hope you are clear with all the concepts now. Hana, I can see that maximum, in fact, except for one or two instances, I've got correct answers from all of you. Okay, ninth is left, which we'll be doing in next session. Now, the MCQs, quickly read the first one and send in your reply. You may write one and what is the correct answer. Initials, matlab apne signatures, Pooja, that we have. Suppose I am one of the audit team members or you are one of the audit team members, then you will put the initials na, as to who has done it in order to fix the responsibility. Pooja, is it clear? So what is the answer? Dash refers to a difference between the amount, classification, presentation or disclosure of a reported financial statement item and the amount, classification, presentation, disclosure that is required for the items in accordance with the applicable FRF. So the answer is A, misstatement, if you remember. Shri Ram, with respect to internal control wala, wait. Just a minute. Rest of you, please do question number second of MCQ. Shri Ram, it is not mentioned that control risk refers to. It is mentioned it is a function of effectiveness of. Shri Ram, is it clear? It is not mentioned that control risk means. It is mentioned it is a function of the effectiveness of design, implementation and maintenance of internal control by management. So Shri Ram, is it clear? Please send in your reply. So the answer is A. Send in your replies for question number 2. And Shri Ram, send in your reply. It is mentioned it is a function of. It is not mentioned it means. Is it clear now? So the second question is, because the assessment of risk of material misstatement takes account of internal control, the extent of substantive procedure may need to be increased irrespective of the results from test of controls. The extent of substantive procedure may need to be increased when the results from test of controls are satisfactory. The extent of substantive procedure may need to be decreased when the results from test of control are unsatisfactory. And the extent of substantive procedure may need to be increased when the results of test of control are unsatisfactory. So, which is the right answer? Shri Ram is saying it is clear. Shri Nagalakshmi, please check your answer. Question number 2. Students, there is no hurry. At least here there is no hurry as such, no pressure on you of exams. So please read the question carefully and try to answer it correctly. वैसे 99% of the answers that are coming to me are coming correct. ठीक है? So the answer is what? D. So it says, since the assessment of risk of material misstatement takes account of internal control. Why? Because इसमें भी हम control risk को check करते हैं. ठीक है? The extent of substantive procedures may need to be increased when the results from test of controls are unsatisfactory. If you remember, I told you कि अगर risk of material misstatement is high, तो क्या करेगा auditor? Audit छोड़ देगा? नहीं. He will just increase his work. He will just increase his extent of substantive procedures. ठीक है? Is it clear? Okay. Okay. Shri Nagalakshmi is also saying it is D only. ठीक है? Now the third question. The assessment of risk is a dash matter capable of precise measurement rather than a matter of professional judgment, matter of professional judgment rather than a matter capable of precise measurement, matter of professional judgment as well as a matter capable of precise measurement sometimes, and none of the above. So what is the answer? Ruchita, please check your answer for third. Read the question again. I'm asking you again and again. The questions might appear to be simple, Hana, but what is the loophole or what is the problem that you people don't read the question carefully? You are always in hurry to answer the MCQs or correct incorrect. Why? Because you feel that these are very scoring. These are scoring provided you answer them correctly. And in order to answer them correctly, you need to read them correctly. Then Lakshmi, I will do that. We will summarize the entire chapter in the next session. So, students, check your answer for C. Rahul, Sriram. Sorry, for third. Rahul, Sriram, Sushil. The assessment of risk is a matter capable of precise measurement. नहीं, precise measurement तो नहीं हो पाता है. It is a matter of professional judgment rather than a matter capable of precise measurement. ये correct है. A matter capable of professional judgment as well as नहीं, because we have seen that assessment of risk is what? It is a matter of professional judgment of the auditor. One auditor may assess the risk as something else, the other auditor may assess it as something else. It is a matter of professional judgment of the auditor. ठीक है? Khushi, Hari, Ram, please take your answer. Question number 4. XYZ, achha, this again in the next class, 4th question. 5th, dash is usually issued to the client and the client is requested to, what is mentioned? To get it filled by the concerned executive or employees. So what is the correct answer? Answer to question number 5th. 4th we haven't done. What is the answer to question number 5? Send in your replies. So the answer is what? Internal control questionnaire to be filled in by the client or the client executive or employees. So you have answered, almost all of you have answered it correctly. Okay. So now let me just share the descriptive type questions also. So, which PDF, Mr. Anil, do you want? Anil Kumar. These PDFs of correct, incorrect, MCQs, descriptive questions along with answers have been uploaded. You may download these files, these PDFs. Okay? I hope students you are able to understand it and the chapter, you have understood the chapter, whatever we have done, and I hope that you all are able to answer it correctly without looking at the book for your reference. Hana, please try to answer them based on whatever you have understood. Okay? Next session we will be covering the rest of the chapter along with us. We'll summarize the entire chapter. Sunil Dubey, I can see your 5th answer. Or before that, your answers were not coming to me. ठीक है. Now let us discuss the descriptive question. So what is meant by audit risk? What is meant by audit risk? What is not included in audit risk? So what is meant by audit risk? The risk that the auditor gives an inappropriate opinion when the financial statements are materially misstated. Hana? And what is not included when the auditor gives an opinion that the financial statements are materially misstated when they are not. Why? Because this is an inordinately significant risk. And second was what? That audit risk is a technical term. It relates to the process of auditing. So any business risk like what? Litigation or adverse publicity, that will not be covered in the definition of audit risk. Remember, this topic is very, very important. What is not included in the audit risk? This is given on page number 4.2. This is page number and 4.3. ठीक है. Question number 2. The auditor shall identify and assess the risk of material misstatement at 2 levels. Explain. What are the 2 levels? Quickly send in your replies. Dhanalakshmi, we discussed in the last session, at the end of the session, about what is not included in audit risk. You might have left the class earlier. So for all those who were not able to attend this, what is not included in audit risk, let me just quickly show it to you in the module and let me just repeat it. Because this topic I discussed after ending the session, like I asked you to wait for 5 minutes. So might be you have left the class by that time. So what is not included in audit risk? So see, what is the audit risk? That auditor gives an inappropriate opinion when the financial statements are materially misstated, but vice versa, that financial statements are not materially misstated, but auditor gives such opinion. See, first of all, तो management won't let that happen. Management ऐसा होने थोड़ी ना देगा कि financial statement में कोई mistake नहीं है, misstatement नहीं है, but auditor is giving an opinion that financial statement are materially misstated. And this risk is ordinarily insignificant. That is why it is not covered in audit risk. Second, audit risk is a technical term and it is related to the process of auditing. कि audit करते during the conduct of audit risk arise होता है. However, the risk of the audit firm, business risk of the audit firm, कि loss of litigation हो जाता है या कोई adverse publicity of the firm, so that is not related to the process of audit ना, वो तो business risk of the firm है. So that is why that is also not included in audit risk. Clear? Whose query was this? Dhanalakshmi, I think. Is it clear? I can't see whose query was it, but I hope it is clear now. So descriptive question. So what are the 2 levels? This is what? Financial statement level and assertion level. So what is to be mentioned in financial statement level? That whether it has an effect on the financial statement as a whole and many assertions. And assertion level पे क्या देखते हैं? That what is the impact on the assertion after considering what? Related control. Hana? And accordingly, auditor will decide the nature, timing, extent of the audit procedures to be performed with respect to each assertion level. Is it clear? ठीक है. Third question. What should an auditor do when he identifies the deficiencies in internal control while identifying risk of material misstatement? Batao. What is the answer? Quickly send in your replies. So where is it given in your module? Many of you may not be able to answer this question. My prediction says this. Let us see how many of you answer this question correctly. See, Khushi, monitoring effectiveness is whether the control is effective or not. Okay? It is operating effectively. And evaluating is you are looking at the quality of the control. Okay? Effectiveness is throughout the period. Is it working properly or not? Operating effectively or not? Okay? So, controlled risk assessment when control deficiencies are identified. So this is the answer to question number 3rd. So when an auditor identifies deficiencies and report on internal controls, he determines significant financial statement assertions that are affected by the ineffective controls in order to evaluate the effect on control risk assessment. When control deficiencies are identified, the auditor identifies and tests more than one control for each relevant assertion. If with respect to particular assertion, one of the control is found to be deficient, he'll test other controls. Now, if other controls support that he can rely on the internal control, he will rely, even if one of the controls is not effective. Why? Because the other controls are working properly. And the next paragraph says that if there is only one control which has a deficiency, earlier he has decided that he'll rely. But now when he tests it, he finds that that control, which is the only control, is deficient, it is not effective. He may revise his assessment to what? Not to rely. Why? See, he revises his risk assessment to not to rely. Okay? Is it clear? Page nahi. Who is giving this answer? Shri Nagalakshmi. It is on page number 4.6. This is the paragraph that you need to write. A straightforward question can come. One more question for today, then we will end the session. So question number 4. Messrs. AB and Associates are the Messrs. ABC and Associates are the statutory auditors of Mangalam Limited for the financial year 21-22. What audit procedures can the audit perform while assessing the risk of material misstatement? So what is it asking? So, I'll explain this 3rd question again. First, answer me the 4th question. Radhika, Karthik, I'll explain. Wait. See, this question is simply asking you about risk assessment procedures. What audit procedures can the auditee perform while assessing the risk of material misstatement? Shri Nagalakshmi is correct. Inquiry, observation, inspection, remember, and analytical procedures. Hana? See, you all have started giving some different answers. A very simple question asking for risk assessment procedures. Okay? So let us just discuss the control deficiency wala answer. So what was it? If control deficiencies are identified. See, it is saying that suppose with respect to a particular assertion, there are number of controls. ठीक है. With respect to one of the control on a particular assertion, it has a deficiency. However, let's say there are 4 controls on one particular assertion. Manual control भी है, IT control भी है, physical control भी है. One of the control is not working properly. It has some deficiency. So, however, if the other controls are working effectively, so auditor may rely on it. However, if the other controls are not working properly, auditor may not rely on control. Where is it written? Let us just read this second paragraph. When control deficiencies are identified, an auditor identifies and tests more than one control for each relevant assertion. He evaluates control risk considering all the controls he has tested. If auditor determines that they support or rely on control risk assessment, or if compensating controls, what is compensating controls? वो जो remaining 3 things, these are identified, tested and evaluated to be effective, he may conclude that the rely on control is still appropriate. अगर वो भी effective हैं, one of the controls is not effective, then he may continue to rely on control. Otherwise means that if other 3 controls are not supporting this, he may change the control risk assessment to not to rely. Now he was relying on the control, but when he actually checked, he found that there is a deficiency. He also found that 3 other controls are working. So if these 3 are working effectively, he may continue to rely. Okay? However, if these 3 are also not working effectively, he may change his assessment to what? Not to rely. Okay? So see, when a deficiency relates to ineffective control, that is the only control identified for an assertion. एक ही control and that is deficient. Earlier auditor was relying on it. So he can change his assessment now. The assessment of risk of material misstatement can be revised now as and when the audit will proceed. He revises the risk assessment to not to rely on control for associated assertion. ठीक है? As no other control have been identified that mitigate the risk related to the assertion. Mitigate is what reduces or deletes the risk related to the assertion. ठीक है? Now, if the deficiency is related to what can go wrong out of several what can go wrong. So, if an internal control has been implemented for 4-5 issues, ठीक है? Now, with respect to one issue, the internal control is not working properly. However, with respect to the remaining 3 or 4 issues, the internal control is operating effectively. So, auditor can rely on that control. However, with respect to the area which can go wrong, where the internal control on that particular assertion is not operating effectively, he may extend his audit procedure, he may perform additional audit procedure. Now read it. If the deficiency relates to one what can go wrong. What can go wrong is what? With respect to a particular thing, there are 4-5 risks. है ना? 4-5 चीजें हैं जो गलत हो सकती है जिसके लिए इंटरनल कंट्रोल लगाया है. Out of that, on one area, the internal control is deficient. तो उस area में extra work कर लो ना, बाकी में rely कर लो. If the deficiency relates to what can go wrong, out of several what can go wrongs, he can rely on controls, but performs additional substantive procedure to adequately address the risk related to the deficiency. तो एक internal control को अगर 4-5 areas पे आपने लगाया है with respect to particular assertion, and out of that one is not being looked after by that internal control. So with respect to that one area, you may go for additional performing additional procedures, and for the rest you can rely on the internal control. Is it clear? Radhika is saying it is clear. और किसका डाउट था? I think it was Karthik's doubt. Is it clear now? हाँ, Karthik. See, to evaluate, Hiral, to evaluate means to assess as to what is the quality of the internal control, and reviewing is how is it working. है ना? During the operating effectiveness देखना is what reviewing. Yes, Karthik. If Karthik is saying if he'll read, he'll be able to understand it in much better way, which is absolutely correct for all of you. Go through the module and read all each and every line. Why? Because every line is connected, and out of any line you may get a question, MCQ, true, false, descriptive type of question, anything can come. Okay? And since you have understood from the sessions, since you are giving a reading to the entire chapter with concentration, one or twice you may need to read. Thereafter, you will be able to answer each and every question correctly. Okay? Learning part might be left, picking up the keywords and everything, but conceptual clarity will be there if you go through the entire module. Okay? So I hope it is clear now. Okay? So I'll do one thing. We have done till question number 4. So again, I'll request you, please go through the entire chapter which we have done today. And next session we'll be doing the remaining questions. We'll be doing the remaining chapter, and most importantly, we'll be revising, summarizing the entire chapter, which will definitely help you in learning. Okay? So before coming for the session, please go through the entire chapter so that when we are summarizing, when we are revising the chapter, you are able to remember all the topics. Okay? So with this, I'll end the session for today. Have a happy learning, and please start learning, start reading the module. Okay? And good night. हाँ